What's up, everyone? This is the Next Take Podcast, episode 193 with Mikel
And Tanyka.
real conversations on different topics. So, on today's episode, everybody, we're just going to be um talking about a topic today, and Tanika represents us with that.
So we will be talking about the Watergate scandal. Here we go. Found it. Found my notes. The Watergate scandal. That's what we're going to be talking
Mhm.
about.
Mhm.
So have you heard of the Watergate scandal? Do you know anything about the Watergate scandal?
I heard some things about it, but not a lot.
Not in depth. That's
Yeah.
kind of for me too. I've definitely heard about the Watergate scandal. I think once on another podcast. It was hard to not hard to follow, but somewhat hard to follow. But I know generally kind of what went down. So
Mhm.
thought it'd be an interesting topic. It's political, back in the day political, and
Mhm.
you know, easy to digest type political stuff than what we are dealing with currently. So that's why I thought, we can do this.
Mhm.
So let's get into it.
All right.
The Watergate scandal, interlocking political scandals of the administration of U.S. President Richard M. Nixon that were
Mhm.
revealed following the arrest of 5 burglars at the Democratic National Committee, DNC, headquarters in the Watergate office apartment hotel complex in Washington, D.C. So that's why it's called Watergate scandal.
Mhm.
And that happened on June 17th, 1972. On August 9th, 1974, facing likely impeachment for his role in covering up the scandal, Nixon became the only U.S. president to resign. I wish others would too. But anyways, um, so which I did not remember that part, but he is the only one that resigned. So let's get into the whole history of this. So early on June 17th, 1972, police apprehended 5 burglars at the office of the DNC in the Watergate complex. 4 of them formerly had been active in Central Intelligence Agency, so the CIA, activities against Fidel Castro in Cuba. Um, the 5th, James W. McCord Jr., was the security chief of the committee to re-elect the president, later known properly as CREEP, which was presided over by John Mitchell, which was Nixon's former attorney general.
Mhm.
The arrest was reported in the next morning's Washington Post in an article written by Alfred E. Lewis, Carl Bernstein, and Bob Woodward, the latter two a pair of relatively undistinguished young reporters. Um, so, so they're relegated, there we go, to unglamorous beats. Bernstein to roving coverage of Virginia politics, and Woodward, still new to the post, to covering minor criminal activities. So imagine 2 of them are fairly, new at reporting, and then this is what they report on, which is probably one of the biggest political scandals in history, American history. I don't know if we
All
have
right.
anything that's as crazy as this in Canada, but um soon after, Woodward and Bernstein and the FBI investigators identified 2 co-conspirators in the burglary. E. Howard Hunt Jr., who was a former high-ranking CIA officer, only recently appointed to the staff of the White House, and G. Gordon Liddy, who was a former FBI agent working as a counsel for CREEP. So I think we're now at what, 7 players in this? That's not
Mhm.
including the president. At
Mhm.
the time of the break-in, Liddy had been overseeing a similar, though uncompleted, attempt to break into and surveil the uh the headquarters of George S. McGovern, soon to become the Democratic nominee in the 1972 U.S. presidential election. So we're following they were going to break into and surveil the headquarters of a potential Democratic nominee for the upcoming elections. That is not
Huh.
good. Presidential Press Secretary Ron Ziegler responded that the president would have no comment on a third-rate burglary attempt. The preponderance of early media reports driven by a successful White House public relations campaign claimed that there had been no involvement by the Nixon administration or the re-election committee. Meanwhile, the conspirators destroyed evidence, including their burglary equipment and a stash of $100 bills. Jeb McRoder, the deputy director of CREEP, burned transcripts of wiretapes from an earlier break-in at the DNC's offices. The president, his chief of staff, HR, or Bob Haltman, and the special counsel to the president, Charles Colson, Nixon's close political aides spread alibis around Washington, I'm assuming for Nixon. Meanwhile, the White House arranged for the disappearance, quote unquote, to another country of Hunt, who never actually left the United States, part of a plan for the burglars to take the fall for the crime as overzealous anti-communist patriots. So again, I guess this Hunt guy was going to leave the country so that these quote unquote burglars were going to take the fall because duh.
Right.
On June 23rd, 1972, the president, through channels, ordered the FBI to tamp down its investigation. Later, this order revealed in what became known as the Nixon tapes. So that's Nixon's secret recordings of his phone calls and conversations in the Oval Office, became the smoking gun, proving that the president had been part of a criminal cover-up from the very beginning. Throughout the 1972 campaign season, Woodward and Bernstein were fed leaks by an anonymous source they referred to as Deep Throat. There had to be another name, who only some 30 years later was revealed to be FBI Deputy Director W. Mark Felt Sr. They kept up a steady stream of scoops demonstrating the direct involvement of Nixon intimates in Watergate activities. Two, that the Watergate wiretapping and tapping and break-in had been financed through illegally laundered campaign contributions, and in a blockbuster October 10th front page article. Three, that the Watergate bugging incident stemmed from a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage conducted on behalf of President Nixon's re-election and directed by officials of the White House, part of a basic strategy of the Nixon re-election effort. So,
Uh-huh.
again, putting way too much effort to backhandedly make sure you're reelected as president, which
Huh.
is not what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Lord have mercy, not even Donald Trump appeared to have done that because he didn't
Huh.
win this,
Uh-huh.
right after his first term. So,
Uh-huh.
you know, come on,
Right.
not cool.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the White House successfully framed Woodward and Bernstein's reporting as the obsession of a single liberal newspaper pursuing a vendetta against the President of the United States. Shortly before the election, I'm going to assume, before I say that next part here, I'm going to assume when you're saying liberal that Nixon was Republican. I believe he was, but I don't know. Um, so anyways, where was I here? Shortly before the election, CBS News prepared a lengthy two-part television report synthesizing the scandal's emerging ties to the White House. However, after the first segment aired on October 27th, Colson threatened CBS's president, at the time William Paley, and the second segment was truncated, so it
Huh.
never saw the light of day.
Huh.
Newspapers that were sympathetic to Nixon hardly mentioned Watergate at all. In an election Eve Gallup poll, respondents overwhelmingly said that they trusted Nixon more than Democratic candidate McGovern, which is so interesting when he's literally a part of this. Um, Nixon was reelected in a historic landslide, winning all but Massachusetts. in the District of Columbia, which is literally where the president lives, and embarked on what looked to be a dynamic second term. So we're moving into Watergate's trial and the aftermath of it. So the trial of the five arrested burglars and two accomplices began in federal court less than 2 weeks before Nixon's second term inauguration. The relatively narrow indictment on charges of burglary, conspiracy, and violation of federal wiretapping laws itself spoke to the success of the White House in containing the scandal. The presiding judge, John J. I think it's Circa,
Huh.
however, kept badgering defendants and witnesses on matters not covered in the indictment, namely the financial and institutional involvement of the White House and re-election campaign. So even though it's like not in the indictment, which,
Uh-huh.
you know, I guess technically, I don't know how that works. Like, I guess a judge, because it's his court, can do whatever the
Um,
heck he wants.
right.
But just because it's not in the indictment does not mean that it one at some point couldn't have been in the indictment or it could have had a separate indictment. So, you know,
Hmm.
at least the judge is like, something's up.
Right.
All defendants pled guilty except Liddy and McCord, who were convicted at the end of January. The court was scheduled to reconvene on March 23rd to hear sentences. In the interim, the Senate voted 77 to 0 to establish a special investigating committee on abuses in the 1972 presidential campaign. So I'm assuming for the investigation based on that. Um, so the Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities to be presided over by the universally respected conservative North Carolina Democrat Samuel J. Ervin Jr., who was a strict constitutionalist. Ervin had been speaking out angrily on Nixon's extraordinary extensions of presidential power, including the unprecedented presidential impoundment of funds authorized for expenditure by Congress and his continuation of the bombing of Cambodia, even after a ceasefire had been agreed to in the Vietnam War.
Hmm.
Sounds very parallel to what we are currently dealing with, causing
Well,
wars that make no fucking sense. But I
exactly.
digress.
Yeah.
Um, at the beginning of March, during Senate confirmation hearings of Nixon's nominee to head the FBI, L. Patrick Gray, it was alleged that a little known White House legal aide named John Wesley Dean III had been given personal access to the FBI's Watergate investigation. This revelation was followed almost immediately by the president's unprecedentedly sweeping refusal under the claim of executive privilege to allow aides such as Dean to testify before Congress. Irvin responded that if the president pressed the issue, he would issue arrest warrants to compel Nixon's aides to testify because duh.
Huh.
So, yeah, no one's I think I've said this before, and I learned this in school, like in
Huh.
college when I
Hmm.
started my course.
Right.
No one is above the law. Not police officers, not presidents, not the prime minister or prime ministers, depending, what country you're in. No
Hmm.
one is above the law. So the fact that you have this president Nixon, mainly talking Nixon right now, is thinking that he is above the law because I'm the president is ridiculous. You're not
Hmm.
above the law. And your aides, even more so, are not above the law. Um, they're not protected. Look, the president, let's be real, is always protected in ways that the average Joe is not. But your administration is not protected in the same way because they're not the president. So it's ridiculous.
Hmm.
Anyways,
Uh-huh.
meanwhile, Circa controversially sought to leverage the hearings and continued grand jury proceedings to induce the defendants to speak more forthrightly about a broader conspiracy. He succeeded when defendant McCord passed him an extraordinary pre sentencing letter in which he explained that the defendants had been pressured to plead guilty and perjure themselves about the involvement of higher ups. On March 23rd, Circa read the letter in open court. He then took the contentious step of passing exceptionally long provisional sentences on the defendants. However, Circa made clear that were the defendants to speak frankly to the reconvened Watergate grand jury or the Senate hearings, he'd reduce their sentences,
Mm,
which seems like do it, talk, like who cares? Um,
mm,
so, almost single handedly, with great courage and risk to his reputation, Circa had broken the case wide open. Revelations began cascading through the press. The Gray may have been involved in the cover up that the transnational conglomerate International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation, later ITT Corporation, under investigation for corrupt financial ties to the White House and sabotage the Democratic election in Chile, and that Mitchell may have interfered in the major securities fraud case, of $250,000 donor to the Nixon campaign.
mm,
In the middle of April, with Mitchell and other top aides facing indictment, the president nervously announced that his own investigations had determined that, quote, no one in this administration presently employed was involved in this very bizarre incident. How funny. On April 17th, presidential spokesman Ziegler infamously told the press that all previous White House statements about Watergate were now inoperative, quote unquote. 2 weeks later, on April 30th, 1973, Nixon gave a major televised address announcing the resignations of Dean, so his two closest aides by far, Haldeman and John D. I think it's Urchleman, and Attorney General Richard Jesus' name, Kleindentst, I think. So
mm.
those people have resigned. Nixon protested his own innocence and promised cooperation with future investigations, even while including legalistic language that implied strong limits to that cooperation. By the time the Irvin hearings began on May 17th, my date of birth, a new
Mm.
tenor for American political life had been set. Eye-popping revelations of nearly undreamed of venality at the heart of American power, followed by increasingly threadbare Oval Office protestations of innocence. It would not let up for the next 15 months. That's really long. The daily televised hearings were quite possibly comparable in drama, import, and historic depth to the Constitutional Convention of 1787 that no one in the 70s had clearly attended, of Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858, and the Paris Peace Conference of 1919 to 1920. Again, no one in the 70s clearly would have participated in. Maybe in the 20s. Maybe that.
Right.
Presided over by four Democrats led by Chairman Irvin, who became a folk hero, and to some a folk villain, and three Republicans led by Vice Chairman Howard Baker of Tennessee. The hearings were at first covered gavel to gavel on all three commercial
Right.
television networks, a business sacrifice that spoke to the remarkable civic high-mindedness with which the country approached the Watergate inquiry. Soon the networks began showing the hearings on a rotating basis. Some public broadcasting services, so PBS stations, however, continued to broadcast the hearings live daily. Other PBS stations reran telecasts of the hearings at night, while still others did both. So that just goes to kind of show, like, we talk about, like, the OJ trial was huge. Kind of sounds like Watergate was maybe even bigger than that. Trading volume shot down on the New York Stock Exchange. Housewives threatened not to do a stitch of housework for as long as the hearings lasted. Again, it lasted for 14 weeks, I believe. College students gathered around TV sets and corridors between and sometimes during classes. High
Mm.
schools set up TVs in the cafeteria for all day civics lessons. That would have been an interesting civics class. Um, Never have I enjoyed watching television more than in the last 2 weeks, one Washington Post letter writer testified. With the spectacle of high human drama interwoven with the finest possible example of the democratic process at work unfolding before my eyes for hours on end, with no rehearsal, no canned laughter, very little commentary, none needed, and best of all, almost no commercial interruption. The feeling was not universal. Sticklers, including independent prosecutor Archibald Cox, decried the unfairness of what he characterized as trying the principles in the media. Game show and soap opera fans complained about the, oh God, preemption of their favorite programs. Don't take
mm,
away my soap operas.
mm,
Most significantly for the later ideological direction of the country, though hardly noticed by elites at the time, large portions of Americans derided the entire business as a political witch hunt and would continue to view it into the 21st century. So, some 35 million or so Americans watched the Irvin hearings at one time or another. What did they see? Methodical portraiture of a White House riddled with unprecedented and extra constitutional paranoia and corruption from the beginning, painted by a bipartisan panel backed by the awesomely thorough staff work of some of the best young legal minds in Washington. Um, in the spring of 1969, National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger had wiretapped his staffers. In 1970, the White House set up an illegal money laundering operation to fund its favored Senate candidates. In 1971, after the disillusioned military analyst Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers, the White House seemed to institutionalize what some have characterized as a culture of illegal illegality. That's a word I haven't seen. Okay. One young staffer named Tom Charles Houston had earlier recommended a plan approved and then withdrawn by the president that called for dramatically expanded illegal domestic spying activities by the CIA. So to just to make sense of this, it was a plan that was then approved, but then withdrawn by the president
mm.
to have this spying activities done by the CIA, the FBI, and then other intelligence agencies as well. Don't know why that's needed, and who are they spying on? But anyways, um, this plan was rejected, but a very similar operation, which Americans came to know as the plumbers, so called because its original purpose was to ferret out leaks, was soon at work carrying out some of the same tasks. I want to who are they spying on?
mm.
That's what I want to know. But anyway, it was revealed that as the 1972 campaign season rolled around, roving cells of sabotageurs devised ways to weaken individual Democratic presidential campaigns while making it look like the campaigns were actually sabotaging each other. So that makes sense. So it was
Mm.
about spying on the Democrats, I guess. A parallel fascination of the hearings was the questioning of young Nixon aides who left senators incredulous with their explanations that ends justifies the means morality and became semi-official White House policy. Another continuing thread was the examination of illegal sources of the money that funded the various clandestine operations. The drama was further intensified by ongoing investigation of the White House's attempts at stifling the panel's investigation, even as it was still underway. The malfeasance multiplied each week, dredged up not merely by the Irving Committee, but by journalists, the Watergate grand jury, Watergate Special Prosecutor Cox, and any number of related inquiries, including the trial in Los Angeles of Ellsberg, so which had ended just before the Irvin hearings began. So, media, of course. The operative constitutional question trying the complexity together was framed with special eloquence by Vice Chairman Baker. What did the
Mm.
president know, and when did he know it? Nothing, Nixon continuously maintained. He knew nothing. Okay? He's lying, but he knew nothing. The contention was thrown melodramatically into doubt by Dean on June 25th, 1973, in a nearly 7-hour statement to the Irvin Committee, watched by a huge portion of the American television audience, followed by 5 days of intense cross examination. Dean's account established the president as the prime mover behind the scandal and cover up. However, these revelations were greeted with skepticism by many. It appeared that the entire extraordinary um, business would devolve into a stalemate. The president's word against one of his aides until on July 16th, Alexander P. Butterfield, I like that name, Butterfield, formerly of the White House staff, disclosed that all conversations in the president's offices has secretly been recorded on tape. So, both Cox and the Irvin Committee promptly subpoenaed the tapes of several key conversations. Nixon refused to provide them on the grounds of executive privilege and national security. Boy, if you don't. It's been subpoenaed. It's court ordered. Bring the tapes. Show the tapes. It's kind of like release the files. Anyway, so when Judge Sirka ordered Nixon to turn over the tapes and the order was upheld by the U.S. Court of Appeals in October, Nixon offered instead to provide written summaries of the tapes in question in return for an agreement that no further presidential documents would be sought. The hell? No, because you're you're only going to provide what you want to provide. No, show the tapes. Cox rejected that proposal, and on October 20th, the president ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire the special prosecutor. In an event that became known as the Saturday Night Massacre, both Richardson and William D. Ruckelshaus, the deputy attorney general, resigned rather than carry out the order, and Cox was finally dismissed by a compliant Solicitor General, Robert Bork. It was another extraordinary historical moment. Many responsible American officials literally feared a White House coup d'etat. So I guess because these people were now resigned, the order wouldn't be followed through with. I'm assuming. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking. A storm of public protests pressured Nixon into finally agreeing on October 23rd to release the 9 tapes asked for by Sirka. But of the 9 tapes specified in Sirka's order, only 7 were actually delivered, and one of the 7 contained a gap of 18 and a half minutes that, according to a later report by a panel of experts, could not have been made accidentally. So that means someone did something, they tampered with that tape, which is why only 18 and a half minutes are missing. So, um, the combined weight of all of the allegations that had been made during the course of the investigation of the scandal led to the initiation of a formal impeachment inquiry by the House Judiciary Committee in May 1974. On May 20th, Judge Sirka ordered Nixon to turn over additional tapes to Cox's successor as Special Prosecutor Leon Blorsky it's Jorsky. On July 24th, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Nixon must provide the recordings. Between July 27th and 30th, the House Judiciary Committee passed 3 articles of impeachment. On August 5th, the president supplied transcripts of 3 tapes that clearly implicated him in the cover up. With these revelations, Nixon's last support in Congress evaporated. He announced his resignation on August 8th, stating that he no longer had a strong enough political base with which to govern. Nixon left office at noon the following day on August 9th. On September 8th, 1974, the new president, Gerald Ford, chose to grant Nixon a full and unconditional pardon for any crimes he may have committed while president. Bullshit. But anyways, Ford had become vice president in December 1973 after Nixon's previous vice president, Spiro T. Agnew, resigned amid accusations of financial improprieties and pled no contest to a single negotiated criminal charge. By the time of the pardon, and this whole administration was a hot mess, Lord. By the time of the pardon, enough Americans had become convinced that Nixon, named by the Watergate grand jury as an unindictable co-conspirator, was guilty of crimes and that Ford had pardoned him as quid pro quo for becoming president, that the approval rating of the otherwise popular new president collapsed overnight. The loss of faith in the new chief executive spoke to the extraordinary extraordinary cynicism that marked the national mood 27 months into a scandal in which a clutch of Nixon's closest aides eventually went to jail. For the rest of the decade, both popular and political culture were suffused with paranoia and disillusionment. Ronald Reagan's ascent to the presidency in 1980 had very much to do with his rhetorical ability to break the cloud of gloom that Watergate, along with the U.S. failure in the Vietnam War, had cast upon the country. Even in the early 21st century, the legacy of Watergate continued to haunt American politics. Watergate was so synonymous with scandal that it became common practice for the press to tack on a gate to the scandal du jour, from Tally Hook Gate to Trooper Gate. If we've even heard that kind of reference in modern day with um what's that freaking cult now that surrounds Donald Trump?
Uh,
That one, whatever they're called right now, I don't care. But
the
what are they called
manga,
again?
manga.
No, not MAGA. MAGA, yes, it's a cult, but not them. It was uh shoot. It's not gonna come to me. That's
Mm,
okay. It's basically one where they think like he's like a snake god or something. But anyways, we saw it with there too with like Pizzagate or like that kind of gate.
mm,
And
mm,
so we've seen that even in modern day. Um, the former president, and then after his death, his family spent a great deal of money on legal campaign to prevent the entirety of his tapes from being released. The effort failed, and the entire tape record of the Nixon White House eventually became available to the public. Scholars continued to mine the tapes for insights, including the discovery that Nixon ordered the firebombing of the Washington, D.C. Think tank, the Brookings Institution, never carried out, though, in an attempt to remove records suggesting that he had conspired to sabotage the 1968 Paris peace talks so that his Democratic opponent in that year's presidential election, which was Vice President Hubert Humphrey, could not run on a record of having helped end the Vietnam War. So that's like a thing that for Watergate. That whole other separate thing was separate from Watergate, but
mhm,
it kind of just goes to show how underhanded Nixon was,
mhm.
which is something like it's not news. We know this. Um, but like I didn't know how in depth he was like really corrupt. Um, and again, I'm assuming Nixon is Republican. I'm pretty sure he is or was. I don't even know if he's alive anymore. But um I'm assuming he was. It's just really interesting to kind of see how full circle we've kind of come
Uh-huh.
with the Republican Party now, and very different, mind you. But it's very interesting to kind of see how, like, here is Nixon, who was basically never disciplined for what he did. And then you
Right.
have the current president, who also isn't being disciplined for things that he did, that he was indicted for, and was found guilty of. And then not to mention everything that we still aren't fully aware of because of the Epstein files. So it's it's very interesting, and I think
Mm,
it's also really sad because it shouldn't be like that. Just
oh,
be honest with what you're doing, um, and to go about things the right way. It's not hard, but
that's true.
humans are humans are horrible sometimes, and that's
Yeah,
unfortunate.
that's
But
true.
that is Watergate.
All right.
All right.
So interesting stuff
Yeah.
for the Watergate era. Um, yeah, I have nothing to say or add to that. Uh, yeah, just it's just America for you. So,
Yeah, well, it's
uh,
not even just America, to be totally honest
uh-huh.
with you, it's just
Mm,
politics.
oh,
I
mm,
mean, politics generally
mhm.
is grimy, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Either you're getting the lesser of whatever evil, you know what I mean? But politics generally is just grimy,
yeah. There's a
even in
lot.
Canada.
Yeah, there's a lot of skeletons in politics. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So. And I'll say that there's a lot of politics everywhere, like, not just, like, in, like, government, like, you can go as far as, like, corruption in, in companies as well, like,
Oh, yeah.
as well as, workplaces as well, so,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
Because in so many sense like, in that sense, we have obviously not in the same way, but when you're in a workplace, you also
mhm.
deal with quote unquote "politics" within your workplace. There's
Yep.
no workplace where there isn't some form of
Mhm.
politics, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But for me, I tend to try and stay out of it as much as possible.
Right.
You don't
Same.
wanna get caught up in all of that nonsense and then,
Mhm. Mhm.
something's put on you or whatever, but
Mhm.
yeah,
Right. I agree with you.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. That's it. That's all.
yeah. We'll be
That's all.
back next week with
Mhm.
another 3-topic episode, but, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Okay.
we're good to go
That's it.
then.
Alright.
Alright,
Bye, guys.
bye, everybody. If you liked what you heard with our podcast, you can head on over to our website, which is solo.to/next take podcast. There you can get any of the links to any of our social media, which is Facebook, Instagram at Next Take Podcast, and Twitter, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Next Take Pod. You can also find links to our Reddit page and many other things, I'm sure. Can't remember all off the top of my head. You can also email us at mikeltanyka@gmail.com. There you can send us any inquiries that you have, any questions, or also any episode ideas. And if you do have episode ideas, just make sure you put in the subject line episode ideas, and we'll add it to our list. If you also liked us, you can like us, rate us, follow us on any of your favorite podcast apps. You can rate us, however, on Spotify and Apple Podcast. We would greatly appreciate that. And we'll also move forward and share or spot a light on those who give us 5-star ratings in the future. That is it for us. We'll see you next time for the episode.